Hello everyone. My name is Ian McBurney and I'm the coordinator of the Greater Bendigo Climate Collaboration, and I have had about 700 climate conversations today, and they've all been good ones, and I am going to sleep well tomorrow, I think. Has everyone been enjoying themselves today? Lots of good conversations, lots of good sessions in the theatre. Hope everyone's scribbled all over the road maps over on the wall. This is going to be a fantastic session, and I should also say, if you don't have a ticket to see Saul Griffith talking about Electrify Bendigo from 6 o'clock tonight, that's a different ticket, so make sure that you come along to that. We had, I think there was nearly 300 tickets sold for that by yesterday, so that is very exciting. He's currently in the Tesla on the way down the Hume Highway, and hopefully a bit closer than that even. Now, this session is to have a look at Damon Gameau's Regenerating Australia movie, and then we've got a fantastic panel who can talk about it and who can answer questions from the audience. And the session is going to be hosted by Councillor Jennifer Alden. Jen has been actively involved professionally and with community over many decades, with a focus on health, equity and the environment. Climate and health are significant drivers for her current activity as a councillor on the City of Greater Bendigo, which now in its 7th year. A member of the Greater Bendigo Climate Collaboration Governance Group, she's chair of the Council's Greater Bendigo Environment Committee, the Public Open Space Committee, and of the Central Victorian Greenhouse Alliance. Jen has been a massive supporter of this project since it was just a little thought bubble right at the start. So can you please make Councillor Jennifer Alden very welcome as host of this session, and enjoy.
Thanks very much, Ian. And also for the ability to host this screening of Damon Gameau's Regenerating Australia. So, how are people enjoying the summit so far? Been into a few sessions, hopefully. So much to look at and so many people to speak with, as Ian was just saying. So the Climate Summit, of course, is occurring on Jara country, and I'd like to pay respects to the Dja Dja Wurrung and elders past, present and future. And as Ian has mentioned, I've been working on climate action in different ways for a few decades, particularly with a focus on health and also on our food system. And it reminded me that almost 5 years ago, in 2018, in August, I was standing on this stage introducing Paul Hawken, who you may know of, and when he came out here to talk about his work on drawdown, which has largely inspired a lot of this work, and his more recent work has been on regeneration as well, which has been a close alignment with Damon Gameau's work, and they've worked together. And the interesting thing that he put forward then was that the facts that we've been hearing more recently again, that the food system is responsible for 35% of emissions, and also that a third of the food we produce is wasted, and it's often overlooked in developing climate action. So that's something I'm particularly interested in. It's really great to reach the point where a substantial amount of the work that's now being done by local government on addressing the urgency of the crisis of climate change and biodiversity decline, we face across a range of areas, and there's good work now being done. So to see local government step up and to invest, to develop policy and actions, to support events like this, to establish the Greater Bendigo Climate Collaboration, where we can bring together business, community, young and old in our community, to advance a zero emissions roadmap for our community. It really gives me hope for the future. Now, you may have seen this film, Regenerating Australia. It was screened in Bendigo a year ago, but then since then it's been touring the country. And looking back from the end of the decade at what could be different if we implement the tools we have available right now, as you'll hear, currently as solutions to address climate change. We've got a fair chunk of time for our panel discussion, and we'll be commencing with the introduction by Damon, and then the movie, and then we'll move on to our panel. and our panellists, I'll introduce them fully when we have had the film, but our panellists are Professor Lauren Rickards from Latrobe University, Donna Coutts, regenerative agriculture farmer from Spring Hill Farm, and Ian McCaw, who's representing the ACF's Central Victorian Community Group. So, and you're aware the session will be filmed, and we hope to share that with a wider audience in future. And we will be having the Slido technology, so we'll be able to take questions from the audience. So on with the show. Donna Coutts to my right here. Donna and her partner Jason and their 4 children grow belted Galloway cattle and border Leicester sheep at Walden Park at Spring Hill, and that's between Trentham and Kyneton, of course on Jar Jar Run country in the Macedon Ranges. And they sell grass-fed and grass-finished belted Galloway beef direct to customers through a monthly hamper offer. Donna's a 6th-generation farmer from Boort in north central Victoria. She's got extensive media experience, in particular in the area of science communication. She co-founded the National Children's News and Science publication, Kids News. Walden Park is a human-scale, regenerative and agroecological farm, and Donna farms with the promise of transparent land stewardship and food production practices, and the goal of fostering connections between people, the food they grow and eat, and the land on which it's grown. Welcome, Donna. Professor Lauren Rickards, welcome, Lauren, is the director of the new Climate Change Adaptation Lab at Latrobe University. She describes herself as a human geographer, which is a great title. She was a lead author of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and so Lauren's a Bendigo girl, and previously worked for Bendigo-based firm RMCG and continues to focus on regional issues. She's currently chair of the Research Council for Regen Melbourne, which is bringing together universities to focus on regenerative solutions to climate change and colliding challenges. I'm sure that's a bit of a modest summary, Lauren. Ian McCaw represents our Australian Conservation Foundation Central Victorian Community Group. Ian's a retired computer programmer and systems analyst, father, grandfather and a concerned citizen regarding the range of environmental problems currently facing humanity and life on this planet. He thinks, he listens and he wants to act. Consequently, he's a volunteer with the Australian Conservation Foundation's Central Victorian Community Group and the Friends of the Riley Street Natural Reserve. So, welcome our panel. Okay, I think we might just get an initial response. We've all seen this film. Some people might have seen it before, but maybe a bit of an initial reflection of what you thought, how it relates to your work or the group that you're involved with. Do you want to lead off with anything there, Donna?
So the film is fantastic, but the details of the film for me aren't the thing. It's not so much about dates or deadlines or measurables. It's about the stories that Australians would like to see in the regeneration of social systems and ecosystems, about the landscape coming back to life, about respect and pride for the environment, for waterways, trees, mountains and air, and the strength to look to a brighter future, so to stand up, to take action. And it's those feelings and actions that start to come through for me rather than the examples that Damon uses. So that all these things are possible, this coming back to life, respect, pride, strength, standing up, stepping up, taking action. So there's a hook and a feeling that everyone can access from the film. And it was a statement right at the end that was the thing that made me feel the most about the film, and that is, if not me, who? And if not now, when?
Yes, it's always a salutary thing to think about, isn't it? Yes, now's the time. Lauren, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, thanks so much, Jennifer, and it's great to be here. the thing that strikes me, just coming as I do from the kind of research perspective, is the way in which it actually manifests a whole range of things that research indicates is needed. And similarly to Donna, I'm not speaking just about the incredibly compelling examples, but about its whole approach. To me, it's incredibly well informed, and I'm talking not just about the film as well, but the whole project behind it. It really puts into practice a lot of current thinking. And what I'm talking about here is, well, to begin with, in terms of climate change specifically, originally it was thought that, first of all, climate change was something that would happen elsewhere for other people, and it was in the distant future, and that Australia was sort of sitting pretty, really. We had what's called a high adaptive capacity, wealthy nation, democratic nation. It was just presumed that when the time came, we'd just kind of get on with it, really. But what research indicates, first of all, climate change is here. Australia is sort of officially kind of on the front line in terms of the extremes and severity of some of the impacts. But also that our adaptive capacity is not as high as we had presumed, because once you get below kind of very kind of abstract metrics, you realise that there are a huge number of vulnerabilities, social and ecological, and that those are the ones that really come to bite. So one of the messages out of the recent IPCC report on impacts, adaptation and vulnerability is that while the climate is getting more severe and is getting more threatening, at the end of the day, what is actually most influential in determining impacts is actually existing vulnerabilities, the stuff that climate's colliding with. And the way that Regenerating Australia really encompasses all of those factors and puts to us the challenge of regenerating those and addressing those vulnerabilities is absolutely what all of the science tells us we need to do. So it's really cutting edge in that respect. It's also cutting edge in the sense that besides adaptive capacity, it's increasingly evident that what we really need is adaptive willingness to act, and that even those who have very high adaptive capacity seem to be, for some paradoxical reason, highly inert. And that to drive that adaptive willingness, we need to move beyond facts and figures and information sheets of the sort my profession likes to produce. And we need to really engage with people through stories and imagination and across a whole range of different knowledges, including, of course, Australian Indigenous knowledges. And so the film doesn't go wrong in terms of just doesn't miss any of the sort of things that are considered needed. And it finishes, of course, with what we know more than ever, which is that call to act and call to engage people. And the final thing I would say is that the fact that it also, as a sort of system, encourages community showings of the film, as we are doing here, encourages people to come together to discuss it, to learn, to use it as a seed, is also exactly what all of the research suggests is the only way we need to move forward.
There's a lot in that. Thank you, Lauren. And it was interesting when you mentioned the existing vulnerabilities, because if people were in the previous session on social justice, we're talking about existing vulnerabilities with regards to equity, impacts of climate change. So that certainly echoed that similar thought. And the new areas of science that are coming up that we're understanding now, interesting to see the link between the fires of 2019 and then the link being made to 3 years of El Niño, and now what we're experiencing as directly resulting from the fires. So we're still learning, aren't we, how one thing then links into something else. And Ian, did you have any reflections?
I think my reaction to the movie was I didn't get it, I don't think, until I watched it with an introduction by Damon, where he set the scene about the problems we face, about the crisis in nature, about the need to more urgent action on climate change. The whole thing made a bit more sense to me then, and what I got out of the movie was that he referred to a couple of instances of specific instances of changes to our democracy. The Youth Council being able to make representations to Parliament, the recognition, total recognition of Indigenous sovereignty on the land, and the value of the recognition of that sovereignty to the solution of the problems that we face. So the whole thing then was, to me, rather aspirational, and it's certainly something that is possible. I think the time frame of 2029 is a bit optimistic at this stage, but yeah, a valuable movie. But the main thing I got out of it, was at the end, a line at the very end where he said that things had changed, where citizens, communities and businesses had stepped up and were showing our leaders how to lead. And that is what we need. Community input to being governed. The people we elect are not there to tell us what to do. They're there for us to tell them what we want them to do. So that's what I've got to say about the movie.
And yeah, well done. He was referring to that renewed purpose and feeling more secure, and that for communities and businesses to be able to step up. Yeah, so that was a great conclusion. Now, maybe just a little bit more about your individual involvements. Donna, at Spring Hill and your regenerative agriculture practice, do you want to tell us a little bit about how the farming community is shifting to zero emissions?
Yeah, I think it is happening, and it's starting with individual farmers, but we're starting to collectivise and really lean on one another in peer-to-peer learning possibilities in groups. Bendigo and my Shire, Macedon Ranges, are both establishing regen farmers groups where you can share resources and ideas, but it is still up to individual farmers to really research these things and try just try things and see what happens with one eye on science, but also closely watching your farm. We began conversion from conventional farming on our property at Spring Hill in 2017. So that means we moved from conventional farming to low input, regenerative, holistic land management, and started to think of ourselves as not just farmers but land stewards, where we were given an opportunity to look after something and take that as the basis of how we farm. So we work with nature on our human scale, walkable farm, by watching, observing closely, and having as our fundamental actions of observing, growing, nurturing, and then sharing what we learn and also what we produce with our community. So, and sharing that's happening between farmers, but also in the broader community as well. So, I think things are looking really positive in local communities of farmers, but beyond farming and into the wider community as well.
So beyond the community of interest necessarily.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So we're starting to really see the importance of reaching the people who eat the food that we grow, for instance, and telling our story so that we can inspire people to access food that's grown in a regenerative way and engage in the whole narrative of looking after the landscape.
And there was a part in the film which talked about changes happening with agricultural practices when farmers were measuring carbon and then linking that to increase in nutrition in the foods, and so that that understanding, when people understand that well, then that helps to make that change too. So that was an interesting part I found in the film. And then when you connect it more to your broader community, there was another quote that sort of leapt out a bit: we can deal better with the world when we're connected to nature. And so maybe that's part of that whole regenerative viewpoint within a community, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you, when people are connected to the source of their food and how it's grown and the landscape they live in, that's a really empowering thing for people to. It makes life more complex, more interesting, more satisfying and healthier, I think. Yeah.
Meaningful.
Yeah, more meaningful.
Thank you. And Lauren, do you want to talk to us a little bit about the challenges of climate adaptation in the region? I'm going to say no small challenge, and the focus of your new job at Latrobe University is head of that climate change adaptation whole focus there.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so our climate change adaptation lab is, I guess, trying to take a slightly different approach to adaptation, in that we're a lot of adaptation, which is, for those, just simply means trying to reduce the risks and impacts. And a lot of it acts a little bit like we're in a game of statues, as if someone's blown a whistle and it's like, right, freeze, now secure everything we have. Now we know that everything we have is not fantastic and is not regenerative. We also know that there's things today that we don't have. And so when we actually start thinking about what it is that we do need to perpetuate into the future, it takes you back to sort of thinking about what we call is the referent object. What is our focus of adaptation? And what we've focused on in our lab, which draws on my experience with the IPCC and thinking about these things, is the question of work. And by work, I mean purposeful activity. So it's paid, but it's also unpaid. It's formal, but it's also informal. It's the stuff that we do together. And in particular, we're focused on the work that produces what we call public good adaptation, that actually generates our collective well-being. And this is quite distinct from, as I said, some of the existing approaches where, first of all, there's a very strong focus simply on physical infrastructure. So most of us would be in organisations of some sort where if there's an adaptation plan, the first thing that they would talk about is how to secure the buildings and potentially other forms of infrastructure. But what we're trying to do is to respect the importance of that work, but also to say it's necessary but not sufficient. And we need to look at the people, we need to look at our systems, we need to look at our ability to function and to achieve what we need to achieve, including greenhouse gas mitigation, which is extra hard work that we're trying to load on to today's society. So when you think about all the work that we have in front of us to regenerate existing vulnerabilities, to reduce greenhouse gases, you realise the importance of actually trying to protect and sustain and enhance our capacity to do purposeful collective work for the collective well-being. So that's what we're trying to do. Now, Latrobe is actually an amazing place to do this. It's not a coincidence that we're setting it up here. And one of the reasons is because a lot of the areas that it focuses on here in Bendigo, where my dad taught, Latrobe Bendigo, in the education school, is focused on society's foundational work. So education, health, sport, I would say, community sport especially, but also environment, agriculture, water. These are the foundational sectors that allow us to continue into the future. These are the ones that we absolutely have to adapt well. So that's what we're focusing on, and we're really doing it in a way that tries to take a leaf out of the book of Regenerating Australia, but also all the research that I've indicated, which is to do this in a thoughtful and collective way that actually starts with where people are at and really starts to try to understand the practices that we're engaged in and sift through those to work out what it is that we need to change, but what it is that, you know, we really need to nurture and enhance. And so, for example, volunteer environmental work and all the extra stuff, like the fact that we're all here on a Saturday afternoon, all the extra stuff, our capacity to do this, you know, we can't take it for granted. We have to protect, enhance, respect and acknowledge that. So, you know, everything we're doing here today is a form of climate change adaptation in our book, because we're actually doing the work of building collective well-being, and that at the end of the day is what's going to really reduce the risks of the additional pressures of climate change to us.
Yep, thank you. And I'll come back to that area shortly with a question we got on Slido. Ian, grassroots climate activism. What about some, have you got some thoughts about, you know, creating a zero emissions future, given the important work that the ACF is doing now? You might even be able to tell people how they can join you. But just some reflections on how that climate activism and working with the grassroots can actually affect our zero emissions future.
I'm no expert on anything. I'm just a concerned citizen. And what concerns me is listening to the experts and realising that genuine experts do not have vested interest in what they're doing. They're science, they're pure science, they're asking questions, coming up with the answers. I think the role of the advocate in anything is to look and find out where a problem exists through experts, listening to experts, other experts that are able to provide solutions to those problems, and then to try and convey the whole thing to decision makers, to politicians and to the community. The Australian Conservation Foundation and many other volunteer groups or other institutions, organisations in Australia are interested in solving, in ameliorating the climate damage. I prefer the word climate damage to climate change. Change is neither positive or negative. Damage is negative. And the role of the advocate is to get out and get that message across. We've got numerous organisations. We've got 350.org, there's Extinction Rebellion, there's Get Up, there's Bob Brown Foundation, our organisation, the Australian Conservation Foundation, the Climate Council is more of an institution, the Australia Institute. They all provide all this information that is available to people if they can be motivated to look it up, think critically about it, and, as Damon's movie said, the community and citizens stepping up and teaching our leaders how to lead. This is what we want. This is what we need. And so you need these community organisations. You need these activists, advocates, to keep on keeping on.
And there's some questions coming through on Slido now, and some will probably, they're coming into themes, I think. So maybe just to pick up on that whilst you're saying that, Ian, there's a couple here. One's around the who's not here and why not today, and should we prioritise convincing people about the need to get involved or focus on demonstrating possibilities, or both? It's an interesting dilemma, isn't it? About trying to get the community involved more, or being able to communicate those possibilities that people might not be aware of. Any comments on that? Anyone like to pick that one up?
Yeah, I think we need to do both. So as farmers, we need to be trying new things and listening to scientists and being good role models. But we also need to tell our stories and engage the community, and there's no point doing these things in secret. We have to spread the knowledge and the learnings as widely as we can. So both those things, I think, demonstrate and share the stories.
Yeah, I guess I would say too that there's a lot of change that needs to happen regardless of how many people turn up at events like this. You know, we need a lot of behind the scenes structural change, systemic change, stuff that people might not ever realise is happening. But work in the legal system, you know, work in the planning system. There's a whole host of things, and sometimes I think we are a bit, well, not naive, but also unreasonable in thinking that every citizen is going to be knowledgeable and engaged on every issue. I mean, we saw the suite of kind of issues that are there. We need a whole lot of stuff that just kind of happens without us necessarily advocating hard for every single thing. And I mean, just on that, I think one of the kind of, you know, most exciting things that's I can see happening, and this is particularly through experiences with this alliance called Regen Melbourne, which is now about 180 organisations, including universities in Melbourne, that's come together after the pandemic and fires to actually say, how can we work together more effectively, is to realise that, you know, we do need a bit of a division of labour on all these issues, but at the same time we also need to be more connected and more coordinated in what we do. And so just sort of smarter citizen change in that sense, I think is definitely the way to go. And the final thing I'd say on that is that, you know, unfortunately one of the implications of climate change we see in those areas, you know, most affected is massive distraction and de-energisation, because you're just necessarily and completely reasonably totally engrossed in just getting by. And unfortunately, you know, that risk of us becoming more distracted is very real. So yes, we do need to engage and get people out and connected, and we know social relationships is the #1 determinant of positive disaster outcomes, but at the same time we also need to do it in a really smart, efficient way, to use that economic language.
There's a couple of things in there. So that coordination of effort, I'm actually reading a book on distraction at the moment, and there's, I've forgotten the fellow's name, but yes, as a society, that's certainly been a continuing issue, or increasing issue. So yeah, very important to bring it back to the social side of things. And still, there's been a couple of other people interested in the spurring people into action. And how do you get to reach beyond the politics of climate change and, you know, even with renewables? But there's been a lot of political tribalism, still is, but that slows progress. So getting beyond that political, and I think you're talking about the humanity side of things and getting people into that, a different way of communicating around, you know, the social connections that are so important for resilience. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, just one quick thing on that would be just to say that, you know, political studies will indicate that one of the most effective ways to get change is to prepare for those windows of opportunity and then do everything you can to create those windows. And to refer to another great film that's around at the moment, The Giants, I'm not sure if anyone's seen that, but, you know, that is a kind of beautiful illustration of what happens where you have people with a really clear sense of what they want to achieve. Then along comes an opportunity. In this particular case, it was, you know, a Labor government looking for seats in Tasmania, and you know, and then you can form an alliance And I think that word alliance is a really good one. It doesn't mean 100% in step consensus. It means we agree to cooperate. And so preparing for what it is that you want, having that sense of what your mission and vision is, and therefore being able to find those points of overlap with others is a really important thing.
And also that awareness that people are sometimes battling to survive with a lot of pressures, aren't they? And so I remember years back with when we had the millennial drought, communities up in the Mallee Track, you know, people knew very much that it was climate related, but were so needing to survive that they couldn't put their energy into the bigger picture. And so that's where, you know, there's a role for other groups to step in and assist and do some of that leadership work. There's some other questions around climate justice, which is an interesting one, and we've had a session, as I mentioned before. And Lauren, maybe there's a few people interested in how the research that you're involved with helps our direction to support vulnerable community members to adapt. So it's sort of still on that same theme in some ways. People who are probably described as vulnerable, and well, it covers a range of descriptions, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, that's one of the key things. I mean, climate change is a really odd thing to work with in a sense because, in a sense, it feels like kind of Groundhog Day, that, you know, the same problems keep emerging as key problems, and they include the structural inequalities that mean that we do have enormous vulnerabilities in Australia from a socio-economic area perspective. Likewise, other forms of marginalisation, so groups whose voices don't get heard. And of course, you know, Australian Indigenous communities are working hard at the moment to really turn that around with the voice at the moment. But at the same time, climate change also twists things, and so one of the things we have to do is to be careful not to just kind of take kind of existing categories of vulnerability and just sort of presume that that's how things work. So again, you know, Australian Indigenous communities, yes, highly vulnerable to climate change, primarily due to settler colonial systems, but then actually, you know, the strongest in terms of adaptive capacity in a range of other measures. And when you start thinking about that, it's actually sometimes the groups that seem most privileged that actually you feel the most sorry for, because they're just sitting there like sitting ducks, ready to have, you know, once we hit sustained rolling blackouts, those of us in these centralised systems, highly reliant on continual digital connectivity, electricity, all these other things, and completely helpless when it comes to working out any other way of getting around things. You know, it sort of really sort of turns things on its head, for example. So, yeah, certainly our work is doing its best to work in a really ethical way that works really hard to look at these existing systemic vulnerabilities, but at the same time we're not falling into the trap of sort of blindly assuming that that's how things will always be and play out, looking differently, seeing that, you know, among our senior citizens of the world, there's a huge amount of adaptive capacity there that the rest of us really need to learn in terms of ways of getting by in more frugal ways, for example. So there's a whole sort of range of vulnerabilities we need to address.
And vulnerability and overwhelm, we've sort of touched on that. We've now got a question around people experiencing climate change despair and practical solutions to that, so it's slightly different. Ian, do you have some thoughts on that? People who despair, how is your thinking about how people can be maybe effective in different ways if they are experiencing that?
Jen, I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing your questions, but if I could just say that it amazes me that I can turn on the TV and hear the President, is it, of the United Nations saying that the world is on the edge of catastrophe and that we must not introduce new coal mines throughout the planet. We hear the ICPP, International Panel on Climate Justice, of Climate Change, saying that they've produced their final report. And part of that is no new coal mines. The International Energy Agency says no new coal mines. This is quite a simple problem to me, in that our government is in the process of, they've just approved 4 new coal mines. Now, do they believe in climate change or not? I mean, it's a simple question. Are they disagreeing with these scientists, these people, these climate scientists, and saying, well, we've got other problems to solve as well? Sure they have, but the most important problem is the future of this planet. And if we can't come to the realisation that we must, for the future of life on this planet, we must look at everything through the lens of climate change and the environment. Because the only reason climate change is a problem is that it affects nature. It affects the sustainability of life on this planet. And if we don't take notice of that in everything we do, all the other problems that we're trying to solve, for present problems, are going to be meaningless, because there will not be a future.
So if people are despairing, then what would you suggest?
Sorry?
If people are despairing, then what would you suggest they do?
Act. Mm-hmm. Tell your politicians, tell them to be genuine about the transition. We've got ourselves into a stage where we need humongous amounts of energy for human beings to survive. I think we've just got to realise that perhaps this is not possible. We've got to live lighter. We live in a system, a capitalist system, that requires perpetual growth. To me, it's insane. It's not possible. We've got to live more lightly. Look at the people look at the Indigenous culture. Look at all Indigenous cultures throughout the world, throughout the progression of civilization. They were a part of nature. We are a part of nature. We have, through our knowledge, through the billions of neurons in our brains, been able to separate ourselves from nature and dominate it. And we're going to pay the piper unless we realise that we've got to take a step backwards. We've got to live more lightly. We've got to consider the concept of degrowth. Instead of having an ever-expanding economy, contract it.
Yep.
Use less. The solutions are there, but we're still heading for, like lemmings, to the edge of the precipice. Sorry to be depressing, but the only way you can change it is by facing reality and realising it.
And there was some interesting, measuring different parameters that, like the donut economics that was referred to in the film. So if we're measuring things differently and telling a different story, maybe that might help people with their sense of despair. I don't know if either Lauren or Donna have got any thoughts on that, uplifting people to be active.
I think the film talks about regenerating ecosystems, but also regenerating social systems. Yeah. And I think that one of the most positive things that human beings can do is collaborate, cooperate, communicate, and work together. And I'm not diminishing anybody's sense of despair, but acting with other people is surely something that fosters positivity and rather than doing nothing and doing nothing alone and feeling alone. Hopefully that's a way forward, is to regenerate social systems so this can, people feel that it's a normal thing to work together and that they can achieve things together. A synergy. Yep. Everybody's greater than the sum of their parts. The whole is more than the sum of the parts. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
To quote Aristotle. Yeah. And so just with regards to, there's a question with regards to your practice as a regenerative farmer, how difficult or easy you find that to be, and do you think other farmers are motivated to do that same work?
I think there was a groundswell of farmers who are interested in doing their bit and doing things differently. And it's not very long ago that farmers farmed regeneratively and with the land. It's really only a couple of generations where industrial farming held sway. It's quite a new idea, so we're not going back too far to be putting the land first and animals and humans first. They're not new ideas. So I think there is a groundswell, but also as the economics of farming conventionally aren't stacking up. If you read the Weekly Times or the Stock and Land each week, there is a story on the front page almost every week about the rising cost of fertilisers and herbicides and insecticides and diesel. So it starts to... farmers who've done okay farming conventionally and on large scale are starting to see that they have to find other ways, if only, and it's not an only, but to make a profit. I think that's so. It's
a big determinant, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
the bottom line. And on the regenerative ways, there's some questions also to Lauren about, what does it mean? We've talked about regeneration and the film and the bigger picture, but what does it mean for a city like Bendigo to adapt in regenerative ways? And what does it look like in an urban context here?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, just to sort of segue from what...
from the agricultural side.
From Donna, what
you can
Donna
pick that one up too.
What Donna was saying. Yeah, one of the, I guess, key things that, we can all focus on is, called social infrastructure. So it's these spaces and places and systems that allow us to come together. And then from that, you can then imagine a sort of petals coming out of all of the ways in which we can then positively change other spaces and systems, including agriculture, including the way we think about and manage water, and thinking about healthcare, etc. And one of the, I think, core sort of spines that Bendigo has to build on is its existing social infrastructure. We're in such a space here, but there's all sorts of other ones, places where people can come together to know each other, and just simply knowing each other has huge benefit, but then also to share ideas and to talk as well. So, for a place like Bendigo, it's about thinking about those strengths and then building out from those. At the same time, I think for Bendigo, adaptation raises questions about history and about legacies of particularly the gold mining histories, and the need to actually kind of address, as every place does, but kind of a long list of things that have been thrown in the too hard basket. I'm thinking here particularly, I'm influenced by one of my colleagues, Susan Lawrence, who's an archaeologist and has written an excellent book called Sludge that you may know of, talking about the heavy metal load that's in the soil that I grew up eating and breathing. But, the mercury, the arsenic, that's just an example of one of those issues that's there that climate change is exposing. It's actually directly worsening as well, because by having a more volatile, hot climate, we're talking about mobilising a lot of these kind of zombie chemicals. So it's an opportunity for us to kind of do the stuff that we have needed to do for a while. So what's regenerative about it is that we're actually repairing, but we're also creating new opportunities by actually coming together to address these really difficult questions. So, yeah, and I mean, and I could talk more about the specifics of Bendigo, but I'm sure people here are better equipped to do that than I am. But just to say that across all of it, we really need to be thinking about actions that always have multiple benefits. We have no time and space and energy for single problem solutions. Everything we do, whether it's the way we do it or the kind of goals that we give it, everything we do has to be hitting multiple targets at once.
It's interesting thinking about our community in a larger picture, and I'll probably put my councillor hat on thinking about we're looking at a managed growth strategy for Bendigo. So it's projecting into years into the future. How do we want the city to grow, where and in what style? And so that's a very active conversation, and the community will get an opportunity to have feedback on that later in the year. And that the spatial or the social infrastructure, just thinking about the placemaking relating to how we see our communities grow in the future, it can enable that social infrastructure to flourish. And I liked your analogy of the petals. So that's something that might be a really nice addition to the thinking there around emphasising social infrastructure when we're thinking to what communities are looking for in the future. It's an interesting time too, because after the pandemic, we know there's been quite a movement of people from the capital cities into the regions, and what are people looking for in making that move? Sometimes they're looking for something, I think, that you're referring to, that social infrastructure has got a great appeal, as well as more space and a range of other capacities to work remotely, etc. But we are seeing quite a shift in society, so maybe it's an opportune time to be able to weave these ideas in that bring with them that resilience that we want to build into communities.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing I would say is that one of the also other great things about Bendigo that I think does attract people here is that, under the umbrella of this term social infrastructure, there's a whole lot of green space and open space, and Bendigo obviously has amazing resources in that sense, in terms of you've got a national park. Very, very few cities have a national park on the doorstep. I was lucky enough to have it on our back fence. But also a whole range of other reserves. But, the City of Melbourne, City of Bendigo's own analysis, suggests that while there's a great quantity of it, the accessibility of that and the ways in which it benefits the community are not great. So that there's actually, a need to actually have an integrated perspective, work with all of the various landholders from the different agencies, etc., across that, and to think about how that could actually be enhanced. And that's, I guess, pushing to the sort of thing I'm trying to talk about, like moving away from these atomistic secure that, fences, to actually a more integrated way that thinks about the functions and the services that these things provide in the first place, both ecological but also social.
We've got a few other, just a couple of questions on change to farming. About how should we change Aussie farming? That's a big question, and obviously we've sort of touched on it with the move to regenerative approaches. But we do have, on the one hand, you've got rice from Deniliquins used as an example for feeding PNG, but cattle in North Australia don't seem sustainable because of drought or flood. So how do we change the bigger picture of what we're locked into with those big decisions about farming? We can do the regenerative stuff more locally. I suppose it's about systems change or priorities changing. Have you had thoughts about that big picture? I might ask others as well, but you can start off if you like, Donna.
I'll start by saying that I can only change what I do, and hopefully inspire others to make changes in the way they do things too. I'm one small farm in one small corner of Victoria, but I can be proud of what I do and how I farm, and that I'm looking after the soil, the ecosystem around and the landscape around where I live, and producing really healthy, nutritious food for our community. And I can tell that story and band together with other farmers, and we can all tell our story, and that's how things change, movements change. And I'm one small part of a really big picture, and yeah, I hope that other people, we can all work together.
I might find that inspiring. And there's another question that relating to, have you been able to link value and a good return on your products, so on your regenerative products? I suppose that can inspire people to contemplate a different way of approaching a living from the land, as opposed to get big or get out type of thinking. But so there's certainly issues at scale. Maybe Lauren, did you have a thought on that one?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's important to remember all of the players in the agricultural system, and that includes the many financial actors who are incredibly influential in terms of what happens on the farms. And it might be through the kind of directions they give individual farmers in terms of the requirements for them to receive credit. And we know that debt is a real input. Credit is a real input to agriculture. And then you start to have to think about the systems that are shaping the messages that the bankers are giving the farmers. And you start to get a sense of how systemic this issue is. So while farmers have a lot of agency compared to in a lot of businesses, there is still some really sort of, basic messaging coming through, and that's about metrics, the evidence, and also about basic things around profitability, return on investment, these kinds of things. And the system is set up in a way where it's clear that the focus is on short-term return on investment. It's on quantifiable, measurable metrics, and it's really set up to look at a quite intensive system. And so one of the kind of, barriers that I see to scaling up regenerative agriculture, which fortunately Latrobe University and others and partners, I know National Australia Bank's looking into this, for example, are looking into, is how can we create the evidence base that regen farming does do what is so clear to the eye when you look at the sort of out across the landscape. We've got lots and lots of those case studies, but how do you actually create the big systemic databases that show here's the evidence that regen achieves these benefits, and how do you actually then build that into the algorithms and the actual calculations that an average banker is going to do when they sit there and try to determine how much credit they'll offer an individual farmer. And we really need to just get regen into those sorts of systems. I'd also say we need to get into the scientific and research system too. You look at the way in which research is so weighted to a fairly intensive agricultural system. And so you sort of see that it's actually, yes, it's about individual farmers, but it just makes what Donna's doing more extraordinary, because this, the weight of the existing system is so far weighted against it. So, yeah.
But there's hope for change. And I might finish off, I'm aware of the time, so I'll finish off with what was a question, but I think it actually is a good concluding contemplation. Regeneration of nature, soils and food, healthier people and social systems would improve our lives. is this how we convince people to join us on this journey? And it was really the story of the film, wasn't it? Really, I think it's a good contemplation rather than a question, but are you all nodding and in approval or agreement with that one? It seems to be a very big point to contemplate at the end. And if people, we heard from Damon and Gameau at the very start saying to check out the website regeneratingaustralia.com. There's a lot of resources there. There's resources for schools. There's a whole lot of other interesting information there. So I'd encourage people to explore that a bit further. I think at this point we might just conclude, because we've covered quite a bit of ground, and I'd like everyone to thank our panel and to give them a big round of applause. So this session has been filmed, as we've said. It's going to be put online. It will be shared. So if there's anything you think you'd encourage people to catch up with that they might have missed that you think they might be interested in, please do that. And as you head out, you'll have been told about the Zero Emissions Roadmap in the foyer. I think after every session there's new thoughts that might come up that you might want to add something to that. So please do feel encouraged to take that and to provide further feedback on that roadmap. And we'll probably see some of you here this evening for a Saul Griffiths session. So thanks very much.